you have the blue recycle trash can.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest. Do you guys use it? Ours sits underneath our back deck, and I keep like garden tools in it during the wintertime.
Good idea.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Shifting Gears. My name's Greyson Harris. That's Carson Sharp over there.
How's it going?
We're going to start with what is probably the most egregious video of unnecessary packaging I've ever seen in my entire life. Carson, we're going to just take a look up here on the screen.
All right.
And as you can see, it's a fairly large box for what it is. Now, you could take a guess as to what's in there.
What's in the box?
Not till you give me the
What's in the box?
But I don't know if you could possibly guess at this point.
What is it?
And
Dude, seriously?
Yeah,
Is
seriously.
what is that, lipstick?
One tube of mascara.
What?
One tube of mascara. Let's take out the rest of the paper there. And yep, the box truly is empty, and there it is in all of its glory, taking up a total of like 5% of that
Dude,
box.
That thing's so small you would lose it if you shipped it in anything smaller, but still it seems like such a waste of space and time and everything.
It's a ridiculous waste of space and time. And so this isn't just a one-off thing. Yeah, that's a horrible example of it, probably the worst I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But it happens quite often. That empty space in that box, it's what people in the industry call void fill. Void fill is basically any sort of space or material that is separate from the product. And as we're going to learn here today, void fill is a big issue that not only costs shippers and manufacturers money, but it's also very, very harmful for the environment as well for fairly obvious reasons. So how big of a problem is void fill? How common is it? Well, depending on the source of the estimates, depending on really who you ask here, void fill can account for anywhere from 40% up to 58% of a typical box's size. Now that's important for a few different reasons. One, we'll start with shippers. We'll start with how this is costly for manufacturers and shippers and why this is monetarily a bad issue, because if you want industries to fix problems, you have to tell them why it costs them too much money. Otherwise, they might not fix it.
Right.
The main gist of it is that shippers are overpaying by using more aircraft and trailer space because parcels can't really be optimally cubed out, right? So it's like playing a really horrible game of Tetris. Better packaging means that you're going to be using less air cargo capacity, fewer trailers, less materials. Typically now, companies are going to be spending between 10 and 40% of the product's retail price on packaging, all right? So for example, if the product sells for about $100, then the company is going to be spending anywhere between $10 and $40 on packaging. Now that isn't just materials, right, Carson? That includes labor as well, right?
Yeah, well, that's kind of a hidden cost that a lot of people may not think of, but there's the cost of the physical packaging, so the boxes, the void fill that you talked about, the labels that go on the boxes, but also you have to consider the time cost that's sunk into this. So for example, big warehouses, big companies like Amazon, for example, they may be able to automatically load these boxes using robots or conveyor belts or things like that, but smaller shops, the majority of companies out there, they're paying people hourly to physically pack these boxes, and it may take, depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it, you may pay 4 or 5 guys an hourly wage just to sit there for an entire day or an entire week in some cases and take this material from the big wholesale box that you bought from your vendor and put it into your smaller retail box that you're going to sell to your customer. Again, there's a big sunk cost that a lot of people don't realize that goes into the packaging.
And those costs really do add up as well. Manufacturers spend over $150 billion on packaging annually. And it's estimated though that shippers and customers could save anywhere between 6% and 15% in shipping costs, which is up to about $22.5 billion annually, if manufacturers were able to shift to a more efficient packaging. As a matter of fact, an analysis from FedEx showed that a 5% reduction in customer packaging size would save the carrier 1 million gallons of fuel costs, not to mention would also cut out 22 million pounds of CO2 emissions, and we'll get to CO2 emissions and environment stuff in a minute. But just from that, you can tell that it would be prudent for companies like FedEx and UPS or, large carriers like that to start making some headway in their sustainability and be more efficient in their packaging process.
It's very evident that there is some inefficiencies. I think the best way that you would get a company to make a transition is to show the the cost benefit.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I mean, at the end of the day, I think certain companies may say they care, virtue signal, or say they care about their CO2 emissions, but do they really? Do they really care, or do they care about their bottom line?
Man, I think first and foremost for them is always going to be about money. I think a lot of these people that run these companies especially are so focused on self-preservation and the maybe not short-term, but in the grand scheme of things, short-term gain of the company as opposed to the long-term negative impact that they may be having on the environment, because to them it's like, well, I'm not even going to be around.
Yeah.
So, hopefully they care about their children. But a lot of them, at the end of the day, if you do want to convince people in the manufacturing industry to make a change and to be more efficient, you really have to tell them that this is going to save you money. This is going to make your company more profitable in the end. It may be more expensive on the front end to shift over to a more efficient way of going. And we'll talk about what some of the hurdles are for some of these manufacturers and why they haven't switched over yet. But I think a big part of it is just that at the end of the day, they need to be able to show to their investors and their board members that we're saving money, that we're doing well on our quarterly outlooks and whatnot. So that's the way to position it to them. But for the average everyday consumer, average everyday person, or for at least me, I can speak for myself, I'm a little bit more concerned about the environmental effect than I am how much it's costing FedEx to move a box. I'm more concerned about what it's costing my long-term health for FedEx to move a box and the long-term health of the planet. So we'll get into that. How does inefficient packaging affect the environment? From a very obvious overview standpoint, delivery trucks and aircraft, they're primary sources of CO2, right? And shippers don't really do the environment any favors by using inefficient packaging and ultimately having to take extra trips, extra trailers, extra gas, extra fuel, all that stuff. So what they're essentially doing is just adding extra CO2 emissions for almost no good reason.
Some of what goes into these packaging boxes, like I think the video that we just watched, it kind of goes to show how crazily inefficient some of this can be. Now, again, a product that small, if you just shipped it, it would be lost or damaged. So a lot of this void fill, it is there for a purpose, but it seems like it may be overkill is kind of where you're going with it.
I think it might be a little bit misguided on the shipper's part to think that they have to put it in a giant box for it to get to where it's got to get safely and effectively, because there are solutions that other manufacturers and shippers have come up with, and we'll get into it more later, but smaller envelopes, for example, like packaging envelopes that are far less material intensive than a giant cardboard box would be. Part of the problem, like as you mentioned, with a giant box like that, well, what happens to that giant box? 82 million tons of packaging waste was thrown away in 2018. That's 82 million tons. That is a lot of crap. About 54% of that was recycled content. Okay, that's a good stat.
Right.
That's good for them. 9% of that though was burned to decrease waste volume, which releases all sorts of just crap into the air, depending on what it is you're burning. The remaining 37%, which is 30,000 tons, that gets sent to a landfill. We all know that generally landfills are bad, but why?
Why?
Right, let's get into exactly why they're bad. Well, waste that attempts to decompose in landfills, it ends up emitting harmful greenhouse gases like methane, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, all those bad things that warm the earth. Landfills also can disrupt and contaminate the ecosystem that was once there before we piled trash on top of it, which can obviously displace thousands of living creatures and plants and things of that nature. Studies have also shown that humans living near landfills are more likely to develop certain diseases and malfunctions at birth as well. So it's not just hurting plants and animals, it's hurting us as well. Let's think about what are some of the problems with specific types of materials used for packaging. I would say the most infamous of the packaging is probably plastic. Plastic manufacturing consumes around 12% of the global oil supply. And that figure could surge to 50% by the year 2050 through a combination of increased production, decreased oil supply, and then also, oil maybe not being used in cars as much and stuff like that, but it will be used to create plastic. That doesn't really seem to be slowing down. In the EU alone, around 90% of plastic was made from virgin fossil fuels, while only 9% is made from recycled materials.
Right, and we have clearly plenty of it, and it doesn't decompose as naturally very fast.
I mean, all the plastic that has ever been made is pretty much still here. Of all the plastic ever created, 91% has never been recycled. Ever. The creation of plastic, by the way, it accounts for 3.8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Now, that may not sound like a whole lot, but think of it this way. 3.8% is actually double the amount that the aviation industry produces.
That's a lot.
It's a lot, exactly.
That's a lot.
If plastic manufacturing were a country, it would be the 5th largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world.
That's actually pretty crazy.
That's insane. But what about cardboard? What about the alternative that most manufacturers will look at? There is one thing that cardboard has over plastic. Plastic can have a CO2 footprint as high as 6 kilograms for every 1 kilogram of plastic created, which is 12 times higher than cardboard. Although cardboard is technically made from a renewable resource, it still depends on how it's sourced. If it's cut via deforestation, where you're just mowing down trees and forests to get this material for the cardboard, yeah, that's not good. But if it's used from sustainable wood that's grown especially from manufacturing, now we're talking. That's quite a bit better. However, globally, around 55% of all cardboard is still sourced from deforestation, so that number's got to go down. We're still looking better than plastic, though. However, just because the cardboard can be recycled doesn't mean that people will actually do it. In 2018, 67.7 million tons of paper and cardboard ended up in the United States solid waste stream. As cardboard decays, it releases methane into the atmosphere, so it's also not good to just sit out there and let it decay. One other problem that cardboard has is that it's bulky and it weighs a lot, so that means it's usually going to cost a bit more to transport, right? Cardboard boxes, they often take up way more space than necessary, as we saw with the mascara there.
Yeah, with the mascara.
Yeah, which ultimately causes shippers to overpay on transport costs. So we've laid out some of the problems. Environmentally, there are quite a few. Monetarily, there are quite a few. So why aren't manufacturers switching to more sustainable packaging? What are some of the issues that they're running into that's causing them to not do this? Long story short, it's expensive. Even though the recycling rate in the US has increased from 7% back in the 1960s to about 32% today, the problem is that there's so much packaging out there that, one, is not recyclable, and then two, even if it is recyclable, the high cost of recycling often will deter businesses or just the average everyday person from doing so. As a matter of fact, it costs about $147 to recycle 1 ton of garbage. Alternatively, it only costs about $28 per ton to send that same trash to the landfill.
And let's be honest, like, I think we all, at least if you live in the city of Chattanooga, you have the blue recycle trash can. Yeah. I mean, let's be honest, do you guys use it? I never use it. Ours sits underneath our back deck, and I keep like garden tools in it during the wintertime.
Good idea.
Biodegradable materials can cost anywhere from 2 to 10 times more than non-biodegradable alternatives, okay? That's probably the biggest issue that's going on that makes it so expensive. This includes materials like paper and other compostable or biodegradable packaging. And depending on the packaging type, plastic can actually be close to 4 times less expensive than other materials. So that explains why people want to opt for it.
Yeah, and another thing to consider is if a company says we're going to go to all renewable or biodegradable packaging materials, that may sound great and their customers may be all for it until their customers find out that their cost of goods also increased that same amount. So
exactly.
I think everybody would be on board for it until you see the cost of your Christmas presents increasing every year. That's kind of where you, I guess, draw the line in the sand. It's like, yeah, we're all for a greener environment and everything, but we're also for keeping costs low. And that kind of reminds me, just to kind of drive that point home, kind of an anecdotal story of recycling. So when I was in college, I used to recycle aluminum cans. You would do it because you were poor.
Yeah.
And yeah, you would go with like an entire pickup truck full of aluminum cans, and they'd give you enough money to maybe buy a cheeseburger at McDonald's or something when you left. So the point I'm trying to make is, number one, the cost of recycling these goods is you don't get paid a whole lot for it. Now, the company doing it, they may make money, obviously, but it was a lot of time to fill up an entire pickup truck full of cans. It took a couple hours, and then to drive there, wait in line, do everything. I mean, it was a 3 or 4 hour commitment to get
$12.
$5 to $12. I guess on the larger scale is you and I buying a case of Coca-Cola at the grocery store and recycling it doesn't really make a dent, unfortunately, in how much, in the manufacturing world and the retail world, how much packing material gets thrown in the trash every year.
Carson, you were explaining a concept of the supply chain to me last week that I actually had not heard of before. Mm-hmm. Do you want to kind of get into that to explain how it can be more efficient and sustainable?
Yeah, I can. So what I was talking about is called JIT manufacturing. It's an acronym for just in time. Now, granted, what the point of this is to make your supply chain efficient and lean from a transportation and sales standpoint, not necessarily a packaging and recycling standpoint. So in all fairness, I just wanted to say that from the beginning. Right. But at the end of the day, efficiency is what we're after. Sure. And when we can make strides in that, towards efficiency in any realm, we'll take it.
I think if you're more efficient in a way, in a roundabout way, you're still being more sustainable.
It's going to lower your costs across the board. And at the end of the day, you're just getting the materials when you need it, which is the point of JIT. Mm-hmm. And I'll go into that in more detail here in a second. Yeah. But when you're just getting the product that you need at that point in time, there's going to be less packaging out there.
Yep.
So what JIT is, again, it's just-in-time manufacturing or just-in-time inventory. It was, I believe, coined by Toyota, actually. Post-World War II Japan, they were the ones that kind of came up with it and refined it. JIT says that you only manufacture what is needed at that point in time. Mm-hmm. And the reason behind that is it cuts down on your cost. So your manufacturing cost, it cuts down on your warehousing cost and space, cuts down on man hours and everything across the board. JIT, it does require accurate sales forecasting. So your sales team may say, we have a customer that wants to buy 100 of them. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, well, we're going to manufacture 100 and they're going to be ready by the time that customer wants them. So accurate advanced forecasting is crucial for this. Mm-hmm. So what you do is you manufacture exactly what's needed, you ship exactly what's needed, you warehouse exactly what's needed, and the point is where you barely warehouse it because you eliminate the middleman of sending things to your warehouse, unloading it from a truck, storing it in the warehouse, and then reloading it on another truck and then shipping it to your customer. And not to mention, you're paying your warehouse staff to do all that, right, to unload the truck, to store the goods, to pick the goods, to reload the truck. It cuts out a lot of cost, and it saves a lot of time, and it's much more efficient to use JIT. Now, the problem is getting it off the ground can be tough because most companies have just been buying more than they need and just waiting for the sale. Another thing, lastly, that you have to take into consideration with JIT is the raw materials that are needed. If you're just making what you need to sell, you only have to buy the raw materials that are needed just to make that amount. Yeah. You don't have to buy a surplus. You're not wasting money for raw materials to just sit at the manufacturer when they're needed. So JIT leans out your supply chain all the way from the purchase of the raw materials all the way to the point of sale, everything in between from manufacturing to warehousing to transportation, even to your warehouse staff and sales staff and everything in between.
A real world example of how a JIT supply chain could be very beneficial to the trucking market is when you look at what happened around this time last year, holiday season of 2022. This is when you go back and look at it, and we have a whole episode about the quote unquote freight recession that ran. This freight recession, this drop off started roughly around this time last year, and part of it, there are many reasons why, but one of the biggest reasons was because there was this surplus of inventory that did not need to get moved. Now, the surplus inventory is a result of the 1.5, 2 years of COVID, where it was just, there was a lot of demand and not a lot of supply, right? And which is why we started having all the buildups at the ports and why the trucking industry was booming. And that was all well and good until finally all the supply caught up to the demand and then overtook it. Basically,
the demand dropped off.
Exactly. And so there was way too much supply last year. Companies had a lot of making up to do. Now, I'm not going to blame them for mass producing something when coming out of a pandemic, because how in the world do you plan for that when you've never done that before? None of us had done that before. I'm not going to blame them for not doing it necessarily. However, if that were more implemented, better planning, better foresight of here's exactly how much we'll need, then one, the trucking industry might be a little bit stronger. Two, this is just for monetary reasons. This is bad for the consumer in a way, but good for the seller, is that they don't have to basically give out a lot of deals or discounts to try to get rid of their inventory, because they have exactly as much as they need, or at least close to it.
You mean if you're utilizing JIT?
Exactly. There are big companies, household companies, that are doing a good job of making their way towards better sustainability, more efficiency, and I think that some smaller shippers and manufacturers can learn from their example, maybe not to the scale of an Amazon or a FedEx, for example, but taking some ideas from it, I think could really help. Amazon, I think, is doing the best job of it, at least of the big companies, right? They are setting the example of how to be more sustainable, and here's how they're doing that. They enacted a program recently called the Ships in Product Packaging program, and it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It eliminates the need for additional packaging by delivering the product in its original box, right? Now, this is obviously more effective for products that are larger and won't get lost in a way that, mascara will. You still probably have to put that in a little envelope or something, right?
But I mean, even an envelope makes more sense.
But even that would make more sense.
The big cardboard box with all the void fill that we talked about.
Precisely. Yeah. Nowadays, about 11% of Amazon shipments are delivered without additional packaging. The other day, I actually ordered a toaster and it just came in the box. I order a lot of litter for my cats for the litter box. That almost always just comes in the big box by itself. Because again, it's a pretty solid box, pretty big already. You don't need to put it in another box. You really don't.
It's just, what's the point?
Slap a shipping label on it and call it a day. There are some issues with this, okay? If the product were to get damaged, for example, that doesn't look good for the product itself. It won't reflect as badly on Amazon as it would for if my toaster came and, General Electric was like, why is the box all screwed up? As
this takes off and grows, I could see manufacturers kind of adapting their packaging to Amazon's ships and package. Exactly. Now, downside is it gives the porch pirates a menu to choose from.
That's what I was about to get to is you have to be careful about what it is exactly that you're doing this with. For me, ordering cat litter, I'm probably okay. If a porch pirate comes and he's, unless he's a big cat guy, he or she is a big cat person. If I'm ordering some New Jordans, I would rather not have an Air Jordan box just sitting on my front porch. It's gone within 5 minutes, right? And so, I believe that shipping in the product packaging thing is a fairly good idea, just depending on what it is that you're shipping. But one thing that I'm fairly enamored with is how they're using AI and machine learning to optimize package selections. So basically, it goes through the conveyor belt, gets scanned, and they are able to use those algorithms to determine what products can be shipped together in one box, or however many boxes it takes, basically to optimize it to where we're not using more boxes than necessary. But the cool thing about it is that so far, through applying this technology, it's actually resulted in an annual reduction in cardboard waste of about 7 to 10%, which is about 60,000 tons of cardboard annually. So this is probably the most beneficial thing that they've done, at least in my eyes, and probably the coolest as well. I've also seen that they're working on making that even more efficient to where they can basically scan all the orders that you have and custom make a box to exactly what it is that you have. So they scan everything and then it goes through this conveyor belt and it gets cut to exact dimensions that, makes the void space as minimal as possible. So I think that that's going to be good innovation, obviously expensive, but Amazon can afford it.
Yeah, they can afford it. And I mean, it'll get cheaper as they can progress it, and it'd be great, especially if you're ordering multiple items all at the same time.
So far, Amazon has been able to avoid more than 2 million tons of packaging materials since 2015, and they've also reduced per shipment packaging weight by 41% on average since 2015, and they've avoided 37,000 metric tons of plastic globally since 2020. This isn't an advertisement for Amazon, but it is me trying to give you all an example of what companies can actually do if they put their mind towards being more sustainable and more efficient. So there are obviously a lot of companies and manufacturers out there that are making the push for more sustainable and efficient supply chains. And if that's something that you, as a smaller shipper, a smaller manufacturer, whatever size, if that's something that you're looking to do, I believe that KCH can actually help you out in that regard. Now, we may not be a packaging company or anything of that nature, but what we do have are resources and knowledge of things like this that we can help guide you towards whatever the most efficient and sustainable course of action would be for your supply chains, whether that's setting up local carriers with local shippers so that there's basically no wasted movement. You know, it's just from point A to point B in a local area. That also helps, determining what the most efficient routes are for lanes across the country and things like that. Those are just some examples of ways that we can help.
Yeah, and not to mention that, but also backhauls. Have freight going, to one area and no one wants to cover it because it's hard to get out of that area. Well, we're here to link shippers and carriers and get that taken care of.
There's nothing more inefficient than a deadhead.
Yeah, nobody wants to deadhead.
That's probably the most direct thing that we can help with, is just getting everything set up for the backhaul and making sure there's no wasted movement. So if that's something that you're looking for in your supply chain, more efficiency, more sustainability, that's something that we can help with here at KCH. If there are any other things you want to know about KCH, well, guess what? We have a website. Just check out our description down below. You'll find all of our social media. We've got the Instagrams, the TikToks, the LinkedIns, the Facebooks, all that good stuff. Check that out for all of your transportation freight news and insights. If you have any ideas for future episodes, be sure to let us know in the comments. I guess that'll be it for today, huh?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
See you.